Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We are happy to have you here today and a fun conversation on the way. Jon Stinchcomb is going to join us. This was already going to be fun, and come to find out, Jon's situation today a little bit different than I thought it was, so credit to him for making sure to join us, even though things are a little different for him than I expected. I'll explain more about what this means in a moment, but there's a very special thing we want to celebrate with Jon today, so we'll get ready to do that here coming up in just a little bit. Off the top of the show, though, you probably know what we're talking about already. Georgia has taken another recruit away from those lousy, stinking Gators. We never get tired of this. It's always fun. It's always good, and it's also important, too, and I don't want you to lose sight of the importance of all of this, so we'll talk about that here off the top of the program. Also, we're going to hear from Kirby Smart today on sort of a weird topic. This is one of those things, I just sort of played it for you. I want to play it for you just because it's kind of interesting. I don't know that it's necessarily all that important, but it is at least a little bit of an interesting thing to hear Smart weighing in on, so we'll do that here coming up in just a little bit. We're glad to have you with us for it. It is a fun show. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I want to begin today's show by looking at the end, if you get my drift. You know, every single day on this program, and we have done this now for a long time, we conclude the show by doing our Gator Hater Countdown. Now, the reason why we do that is, and we've said this now for a long time, probably don't say it now quite as often as I used to, maybe I should say it more as a reminder, is that we believe that a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. And we started doing this in 2016. It was about a year after we had taken the air on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. It was right after Florida had beaten Georgia again in 2016. And I was so tired of Florida beating Georgia, so tired of Georgia losing that what we really wanted to do was try to kind of like cast a vision for how I thought the Georgia fans ought to think. And the initial kind of birth of all this was not just, hey, I want Georgia to beat Florida. It'd be fun if Georgia beats Florida, because for a while Florida had beaten Georgia far more often than we probably thought they probably should have. It was also one of those things that I was really at the time of the belief that measuring stick rivalries were very, very important. That if you were a Georgia fan and you wanted to call Georgia Tech your in-state rival, if you wanted to call them the program's biggest rival, that over the course of a long period of time, you know, you wouldn't necessarily get a whole lot out of beating Georgia Tech, because in most years they weren't very good. That if you really wanted to measure yourself and kind of give you something to sort of shoot for and attain for, like treating Florida as your biggest rival over a team like Georgia Tech would just be more valuable thinking over the course of the long haul. After all, you know, Florida had a big history of winning the SEC East. They'd won it frequently. Two different head coaches at Florida, they'd won national championships. That if you really wanted to kind of challenge yourself, you wouldn't view a relatively meager program like Georgia Tech as your most hated rival. You would view a program like Florida as your most hated rival, just because of what it would mean over the course of a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year period if you were beating them more often than not. That's what we sort of established there. We kind of cited the example at the time of, hey, look at Auburn and Alabama. You know, Alabama hiring Nick Saban has sort of spurred Auburn on to get better. And Auburn's response to that was, you know, they won a national championship in 2010. They played for one in 2013. And that kind of created a response to Alabama where, you know, they sort of took their program to another height under Nick Saban, and kind of the challenge of the rival, the competition within the rivalry, I think made both programs better sort of over time. That we sort of thought that Georgia would be better as a program if it really kind of viewed Florida as its most hated rival. Now, when we started talking about that way back then, the one thing I could have never imagined is just how thoroughly dominant all of this would turn out to be for Georgia. That very quickly, after we kind of started doing the Gator Hater Countdown and saying, hey, we're going to mark time every single day between now and the next time Georgia plays Florida, we started off as kind of a revenge thing of, we didn't think Georgia should have lost to Florida in 2016. So in 2017, we wanted all this to change. Well, gosh, Georgia beat them, 42-7 that year? Just absolutely just thrashed, almost shut them out. You know, Florida had long streak of not being shut out. Georgia almost got that shutout then. And ever since then, the dominance for Georgia and Florida has just been on and on and on, where Georgia has just completely laid waste to the, as we call them around here, the lousy, stinking Gators. And here's the thing. is I don't want you to take any of that for granted, because all of that matters. It matters when Georgia does that on the football field, but it also matters when Georgia does that on the recruiting trail there as well. And we had another example of this here this weekend when Georgia got a flipped commitment from Chauncey Bowens. I love On3 what they did on this, nice commit flip graphic. He was a Gator, now he's a Dog. We would say it. He was a villain, now he's a hero. He was a bad guy, now he's a good guy. He has seen the light. He has had the tremendous change in heart. Now he understands that it's the Georgia side that he ought to be on, not those lousy, stinking Gators. And this is obviously one of those things that Georgia's kind of done quite a bit here lately, which is get involved in the state of Florida, guys that might have gone to Florida, winning that flip commitment, getting them. Chauncey Bowens just the latest example of this. But that level of dominance that Georgia's shown in recruiting, whether it be guys like Warren Brinson or Jalen Carter, whatever you want to think of, where Georgia goes into the state of Florida pulling out a big-time recruit, whatever example you want to cite on that, it's the kind of thing that you shouldn't lose sight of. Because you want to go back many, many years ago, this was the ultimate measuring stick for Georgia is, can you compete alongside Florida? Can you start beating Florida? Can you take care of these lousy, stinking Gators? Well, the fact that Georgia has done that so well should not make you as a Georgia fan diminish the value of going out there and doing it all over again, whether it be on the football field, whether it be on the recruiting trail here with Chauncey Bowens. Now, listen, I think there's a lot to like about Bowens as a player. Dell McGee has obviously had a tremendous eye for talent when it comes to running back position. Bowens sort of represents that all over again for Georgia, targeting a back here. We think that Georgia's going to need some help at the running back position next year, just given what's likely to kind of happen here with guys like Kendall Milton moving on, things like that. So restocking the conference, the running back position, going to be very important. Obviously, Bowens one of those guys that has a chance to do it. But for now, the way in which Georgia fans are sort of responding to all of this is, hey, another win against Florida, and I'm here to tell you that still really matters. Because think about this just for a moment. In the future, there's a lot we don't know about the SEC. We don't know beyond 2024. We have kind of a placeholder stopgap in place for 2024 of an 8-game conference slate. But then after that, we don't know if the future of the SEC is going to be an 8-game conference schedule or if it's going to be a 9-game conference schedule. We don't know if in the future Georgia's going to have one permanent opponent it plays each and every year, or if it's going to have 3 permanent opponents it plays each and every year. There's a lot we don't know about Georgia's future schedule. But there is one big thing that we think we know. There is one big assumption that we feel pretty free to make, that whether the SEC plays an 8-game conference slate moving forward with 1 permanent opponent or a 9-game conference slate moving forward with 3 permanent opponents, Georgia's going to play Florida each and every year. And so the fact that Georgia knows it's going to be playing Florida, and the fact that Georgia currently has this level of dominance over Florida where it's slapping it down on the field, it's taking whatever recruit it wants to take from it at any point in time seemingly that wants to do so. The fact this was true under Jim McElwain, and then it was true under Dan Mullen, and now it seems to still be true under Billy Napier. That is such a huge advantage for Georgia, because ultimately when we started talking about the Gator haters countdown and, viewing Florida as this program's biggest rival and the importance of establishing a level of dominance, or a level of, at the time, it was about establishing a level of success, and it sort of turned into a level of dominance. We sort of started all that and saying all that. It was about the stair steps of progression, that if you want to win a national championship, which at the time seemed like a little bit of a pipe dream, now it's back-to-back national championships, but if you wanted to do that, the stair steps of getting there is, hey, well, of course you got to win the conference and make the playoff before you win the national championship, and you've got to win your division before you can make the SEC championship. And we said, hey, the step towards winning the division is the number 1 division rival you have, those lousy, stinking Gators of Florida. You got to start beating them. And if you can beat Florida, then maybe you can win the division. If you can win the division, maybe you can make the SEC championship. And from there, you can be in the playoff. And from there, you win the national championship. Those stair steps of progression have worked out just like that for Georgia. And yet, even though now it seems like Georgia has far distanced itself from Florida, don't take for granted just how good and how special all that's been. In fact, I want to go back a couple of years ago. As I said before, Billy Napier has been hired as the Florida coach and has done little to change what has been in place between these two schools, these two rivals now for a good number of years. But at one point in time, not all that long in the past, it didn't seem obvious to a lot of national folks, a lot of folks kind of outside the bubble of Dog Nation, that it was all going to work out quite this way. There were plenty of people who sort of thought, well, hey, Kirby Smart may have kind of gotten the jump on Florida, beat him in 2017, beat him, in 2018, but there's a big response coming. In fact, there was a period of time when Dan Mullen was Florida coach, it was sort of thought that Mullen was going to build the Florida program up to be Georgia's equal. And there was going to be this battle taking place with Georgia and Florida that actually made for a while there Georgia and Florida sort of look like the premier rivalry in all the SEC. In fact, one of the guys that was probably the most, outspoken and kind of fanning the flames for all this was Paul Finebaum. Finebaum went on WJOX, sports radio station in Birmingham, and he would talk about just how important the Georgia-Florida rivalry had become to what he really wants, which is getting phone calls and, making a radio show a little easier to do. And he had kind of talked about just how much energy existed around the Georgia-Florida rivalry. Y'all, this is just a couple of years ago. The fact that Georgia has blown so far past this, don't take this for granted. Here's Paul Finebaum for some context.
I will tell you, it was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, whenever we went down to the cocktail party for the first time. I have to be blunt. I tried to feign enthusiasm for it. But you guys, we're from the same area of the SEC. That was a foreign occurrence to me. I watched it every year, late October, early November, because Alabama and Auburn usually did not have a big game that day, but it didn't mean a thing. But after going for 4 or 5 years in a row, and listening to Florida and Georgia fans talk like that is the rivalry in the SEC, I understand it more now. It took me a long time to wrap my arms around it. Florida is a member of the SEC, but it's its own entity in many ways. But Dan Mullen understands the game as well as any coach I've seen since Spurrier, and I know he's a Urban Meyer protege, but I swear he's got some I want to check his DNA. He's related to Spurrier somehow.
So, that's what was being said way back then. In that same interview, Finebaum would go on to say, hey, if I want the phone calls to ring now, I don't talk Auburn, Alabama, I talk Georgia, Florida. He called the rivalry vicious. He said, that's what it's all about, that Mullen was supposed to be this sort of next generation version of Steve Spurrier, the guy that was supposed to put Kirby Smart in his place, or at least kind of play as a little bit more of an equal to Kirby Smart. Well, Kirby, slapped Mullen around and finally sent him to the unemployment line, and Billy Napier is supposed to be hired and change all that. And yet nothing has changed. Georgia is still on top in this rivalry. Georgia is still dominant here in this rivalry, both in recruiting and on the field. And Chauncey Bowen's commitment, the flip from Florida over the weekend, the latest example of it. It's one of those things you should sit back and you should appreciate. Let's face it. The recruiting cycle from year to year can kind of feel sort of long. Sometimes we want this stuff to kind of wrap up pretty quickly, but the truth is the tale is told over the course of many months, and you need sort of small wins on the way to kind of keep the momentum and make you feel excited about the big win that comes when it's all said and done, and Georgia putting together another elite class. Well, that's what this weekend was. Georgia kind of gave you a little bit of a nugget. We're led to believe, there's many silent commitments, and the huge number of official visitors that kind of showed up at Georgia this weekend. Many more of them will fall in place for this 2024 class eventually. Maybe some of that comes in the next few days, next couple of weeks. For all I know, that very well could be true. But for now, the Dogs gave you something to enjoy this past weekend. Flipping a running back away from Florida, putting him in this 2024 class from Georgia. That's one of those things that Dog fans have gotten pretty used to as of late, seeing Georgia beat up on Florida, on the field and in recruiting. And no matter how many times you see it happen, don't ever take it for granted. It's one of the things that makes Georgia special. It's one of the things that makes being a Dog fan during this era really, really fun. Georgia has laid waste to its hated rival, and that is one of the reasons that Georgia's been able to establish itself as the premier program in the entire sport. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We are happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We're available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really happy to have you part of the program here today, no matter how you choose to kind of connect with us. We're just really glad that you did, and a huge thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it possible. If you're watching the show right now, you see the nice Pella sign right there behind me. It's a reminder of the relationship we have together. One of our great sponsors allows us to do this show each and every Monday. We're so thankful to have them as part of the program. But I'm also thankful for what they do for so many of the folks in our audience there as well, because if you listen to or watch our show and you're a homeowner, you know how important it is to take care of that home and really do everything you can to make it look good on the outside, feel good on the inside. And that is what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about. Survey after survey, year after year, here in our market area, Pella is really recognized as the brand leader. Really, we always say Pella window and door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. The reason why that is because these are just better windows and doors. And this time of year when, it's hot outside, you got that stormy weather outside, you want all that stuff to stay on the outside where it's supposed to be. That's what the Pella windows and the Pella doors allow you to do. Or that AC that you're cranking up at full blast right now, keeping that on the inside of your house, not creeping out through, improperly sealed windows or poorly fitted doors, something like that. You'll never have that problem when it comes to Pella window and doors. They're just really good, and they make your house look better, make it feel better. And I think it's time for you to kind of learn more about this. So schedule that in-home consultation or stop by and see them there at their Experience Center in Duluth. I really like that. I've been there before. It's a really impressive place because you can put your hands on the product, you can feel it, you can really recognize what makes it better. You can also have a no-pressure consultation to kind of educate yourself about this. Talk to one of those Pella experts. They'll tell you about the product line. They'll tell you about your installation options. They'll tell you, if necessary, about your financing options. They'll tell you about all of that, and they could even tell you about some special savings you get right now as well, because between now and June 30th, that's the end of the month, you can get 10% off your entire project or no payments, no interest for 12 months. So please stop by and see them in Duluth. Just tell them that BA from DawgNation Daily sent you to them, and I told you they'd take care of you because I know they will. Or you can kind of talk to them by phone, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. Or online, pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's pellaofga.com/DawgNation. Just tell them, as I said before, BA from DawgNation Daily told you they would take good care of it because I know they're going to do that for you. That's why Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. All right, we're going to have Jon Stinchomb coming up in just a moment. Jon was a part of a really cool thing this past week. Actually going to be enshrined into the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. We'll celebrate that with Jon here coming up in just a little bit. Prior to that, I want to go around the Dawghouse. And this is a little bit weird. This is not something we talk about a ton necessarily around here, but it was one of those things that Kirby Smart was talking about the other day at SEC spring meetings. So I just wanted to play it just because I thought it was kind of interesting. So Kirby was asked about the fact that, we've seen the idea of college athletes and gambling be a little bit more in the forefront of conversation as of late because the Alabama baseball coach got fired for this very reason. I saw where Alabama just got absolutely blasted by Wake Forest yesterday in its super regional. They lost by 17 runs, like 22-5 or something like that. And I was thinking, gosh, it's very hard for a 17-run loss to end your season to only be the second most embarrassing thing to happen to you all year long. But for Alabama baseball, that's obviously the case, knowing their baseball coach was fired a little earlier for his involvement in what appeared to be betting on an Alabama baseball game. And we saw some athletes kind of mixed up in this, like Iowa State maybe. You've had some of that kind of stuff going on where there's been some questions asked of, hey, what are athletes doing and what are they allowed to do as it relates to the gambling space? We've obviously seen, the proliferation of legalized gambling. I believe it's either legal or set to be legal in 37 states now. So Kirby Smart was asked about this at SEC spring meetings the other day. This isn't necessarily important because it's not really in the headlines for Georgia right now. But I did think that Smart had some interesting things to say about it. So let me let you hear a little bit of Kirby talking about kind of what the message is to players as it relates to the now legalized world of gambling, which we live in right now. This is Kirby.
Ours was pretty strong because we've had issues with that too in the past, and it's more prevalent. I can't turn on a TV now without seeing something. And there's a lot of debate out there about what's right and what's wrong, but the NCAA rule is pretty harsh for gambling relative to some other things, and it's pretty obvious why, because they don't want that infiltrating. There's a lot of states, I know, including ours, that's been a great debate whether to allow that to come into your state. And it's more about revenue for the state, it's more about protection for your schools, but these kids can do this regardless of what state. It's easy access. I mean, when I turn on the TV in a sports game, sporting event, I see it everywhere. So we try our best to educate the players, and sometimes it takes somebody having a pitfall to learn from their mistake.
It's amazing to me how much, the average sort of coach, player, how little sometimes they kind of know about the gambling space, just because in some respects they just don't live in that world necessarily, that those of us who are not coaches, players, we just kind of are maybe a little bit more aware of what the gambling space is even like because the coaches, the players are so kind of entrenched in their own sport, they don't necessarily realize this. And I think one of the things, you talk about the education part of all that, I think one of the things that's important to educate players on is that, if you're a college baseball player, for instance, you want to bet on a college baseball game, they will figure it out. You cannot do this in secrecy because most of these games just don't have a lot of money bet on them. College baseball games have very little money bet on them. In fact, the Alabama baseball game that was in question, a couple of months ago, there's one of the big betting houses that reported they didn't have a single bet placed on the entire game. So it's not uncommon for a small sporting event, even one involving SEC teams, to have almost no action on it whatsoever. College basketball, a little bit more likely to have some bets, but the typical midweek college basketball game does not have a lot of money bet on it either. So if all of a sudden somebody really feels like they know who's going to win, or if they feel like the winner of the game is going to be a little closer than the experts think, and they try to put some big bucks down on that, it will be obvious that something is up. I've half jokingly said before, the sports book knows something's weird because you're not supposed to win. When you do win, there's an investigation of, hey, exactly what went on here. And if it can trace back to an athlete, it's just very hard to get away with all of this. And so of all the education part of that is, if you think you're smart enough to kind of get a big bet down and going to get away with this, the odds are, and I'm not talking about a Georgia football thing because there's no real evidence of that, but when you talk about the message that Georgia might want to send to its players, that's what it is. Hey, if you try to get away with this, the odds are you probably won't, because these sports books, when they lose money, they have pretty good ways of going back and tracing some of this kind of stuff. But Kirby Smart did talk more about, kind of the opportunity to kind of educate and sort of learn all about this and just how prevalent all this is right now. It's just kind of an interesting thing to hear Kirby Smart talking about. Here he is again from SEC spring meetings.
I don't know that they completely understand it. I think what's happening now is it's becoming much more prevalent, and they have to, because what you just said, I didn't even understand the app. I didn't even know it because I don't gamble, I don't bet, I don't have those apps. Or when you go start researching it, and we were researching it really in the last year, it's like, these kids, they have it on, there's like Chinese baseball games and stuff that people are gambling on. It's like, what? They're betting on horse racing in another country. And it's literally crazy how easy it is and the access they have to it. And then the punishment, you have to ask yourself, oh my gosh, this guy could lose his entire eligibility forever for betting on a horse race, in another country. So we had these same cycles back when the coaches were doing the NCAA and the guys that got in trouble for filling out the tournament bracket. Education's the key, and making sure they understand the rules and they have the discipline to follow them.
So I guess my only real takeaway on this is, can you imagine what it's like being a coach these days, where it just sort of feels like you're having to talk about so much stuff all the time, and there's this and there's that, and now all of a sudden the gambling part of that's there too. And I think that Kirby might be slightly wrong on that. If a player is of age and if he's in kind of a legal jurisdiction, then as long as it's not his sporting event, players aren't barred from betting, like you said, a horse race in another country. You're not necessarily barred from doing that if it's not your sport, right? I don't know. Maybe he knows more about that than I do. Obviously, he probably would. But the point is that the whole thing is just really, really, a complicated thing, another layer of complication for these coaches to deal with. It's obviously kind of in the news right now because we've had a couple of instances in other states where this has kind of been of an issue, and Kirby Smart says, hey, we've been talking about our players about this for quite some time. It's also been a huge issue in the NFL, whether it be Calvin Ridley or there was another thing where this kind of came up, that this is one of those things that sports in some form or fashion are having to kind of deal with right now. And Kirby Smart says at Georgia, we've been dealing with this for quite some time. So at least in terms of the message they try to send to players. So interesting stuff from Kirby Smart on that. We'll make that around the Dawghouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia today. So here was our original plan. Georgia put out a really nice graphic the other day. I was going to show it to you, and I just honestly forgot to. A really nice graphic of all of the former players who are going into the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. We had that announcement on Friday, who's going in. And you got a couple of Georgia staffers right now, Jarvis Jones and Mike Bobo. Obviously, Mike's the offensive coordinator. They are going in. Huge number of former players on their way in there as well. I had planned on talking to Jon Stinchomb about that here today. John's going to join us in a moment. Here's what I had not really realized, is that Jon is actually in the midst of an amazing trip right now. I didn't know this. John's actually going to join us here in a minute from Morocco. This will be the first time that we've ever had an international guest here on our program, at least in terms of an international, someone calling from outside our country's boundaries here. But Jon is in Morocco, having a great time. Sent me some photos a little earlier of himself enjoying his time there. Some beautiful photos, beautiful place, really kind of amazing. Jon here on a camel. I wish I had this to put on the screen here. I don't, but we'll have to show this here pretty soon. It's really pretty amazing stuff of Jon Stinchcomb there. he and his lovely wife on the camels there in Morocco with the beach and the ocean behind them. So Jon, even in the midst of all of this, is going to join us on the program today. Now, I will tell you, I have no idea what time it is. I'm not even sure what day it is. We crossed the international date line. I don't know any of that. But we'll make good use of Jon's time right now by talking to him about all of this here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So, Jon, this is truly quite amazing. I don't believe we've ever had someone calling us from another continent before, but you are in Morocco today. I just learned this. I probably should have known this before now, but just learned this here this morning. And I guess I'm impressed. Like, what time is it in Morocco? Are we, is it the middle of the night there? Is it the day? Like what time is it in Morocco right now?
Well, when I left Spain this morning, I actually gained or lost an hour. So it's only 3:20 here in Morocco. When we go back to Spain tonight, it'll be, we lose that hour. So it may be 3:20, it may be 4:20. I'm not exactly sure, but we're in front of you at least a few hours.
So is it 3:20 in the afternoon? Is that right?
That's right.
Okay,
yeah,
not 3:20 in the morning, thankfully.
For a later lunch. No.
Also, like one of my all-time favorite movies is Casablanca. Like, have you been to Rick's Cafe? Have you seen any of the Casablanca type stuff? Because truly one of the great movies of all time.
So no, haven't made it down to Casablanca. We did rock the Casbah a few minutes ago, a while ago. At least we walked the Casbah. I don't know if we rocked it.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, we certainly got to see some of that.
So I wanted to obviously talk to you about this. This comes out on Friday. I was so proud. I'm on the board for the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame, so I was a part of the voting process on this, and such a well-deserved honor to see you going in as a part of our second class, along with a lot of other former Dogs there as well. And I just wanted to sort of personally say congratulations here on what, as I said, was a well-deserved honor for you. Congratulations on being recognized as a part of the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame, Jon.
Well, I appreciate it. I didn't know where to send my payments, so now that I know that you're a voting member, I can address it correctly. But, it's quite an honor, not only to be recognized for my accomplishments back in high school, but just looking at the class of other not only nominees that were nominated as potential inductees, but to see that final list of this second class, it's pretty distinguished. And I'm just grateful and humbled to be a part of it. And obviously the University of Georgia is well represented. And, it's some serious dog power in that group.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I really like this because, obviously we know you as a Georgia Bulldog, probably first and foremost for our audience, but also you go on to have a great career in the NFL. You won a Super Bowl, as we've talked about many times before. But when it comes to your high school career, when it comes to the kind of, version of this game that got it all started for you, what do you remember about playing in high school, and what was special to you about that time? Obviously, Parkview, a great program at that time, probably the best era for Parkview football overall. But, what became, special about the game to you while you were playing in high school?
Well, I think the first memory that really stood out that this 4-year experience is going to be unique and special came my sophomore year when, for the first time in Parkview history, we went 14-0 heading to the state championship, and another name on the nominee list is Quincy Carter. So we played Southwest DeKalb, and you got Quincy, and on our way there, Jamal Lewis was a running back from Douglas that we played against, and you go, man, this is some high-level, serious football that gets played across the state. And to be a part of that, it was really special. And I think it's only been built on, that was foundational in those years as to where it's gotten now. And just to be another brick in the layer of solid football that Georgia plays, it's an honor for all of us.
And I'll tell you this, which is that one of the things I have loved about my sort of voting process and all this is it's given me a chance to learn a lot more about like the high school careers of guys that, you obviously assume they were very good because they've gone on to great things since then. But like a guy that you played with at both Georgia and the Saints, like Charles Grant, when you go back and read about what he did in high school, and I've had so many different versions of this where the stats are amazing. Our good friend Terrence Edwards a little bit like this a year ago, where you look at what he actually did, like the tangible, measurable stats that he put up, and you're like, gosh, that's amazing for him as a quarterback. For Charles Grant, both a running back and a guy that played defense. And there are a million other examples of this there as well, where I've just really kind of become more acquainted with specifically how good some of these players are. John, I can't tell you how much fun a lot of that is to go back and have a special appreciation for just how prolific some of these careers were.
No question. I think Charles is a premier example. I remember, you go on these recruiting trips and you see some of the same faces, and we would cross paths multiple times as recruits, and just to understand that you look at the name tags and you see him half the time listed as a running back, and you're going, you got to be kidding me. That guy is enormous and was as muscular at 17 and 18 as I would never be. So it was impressive. And you watched his film. There's two guys in that era whose high school film really stood out, and it was Charles Grant and Darnell Dockett. Yeah. And if you ever had a chance to watch some of their highlights from high school, it was men playing amongst boys. And I go on, and there's not a teammate that I had for a longer period of time than Charles Grant. So, obviously we were at Georgia together and then in New Orleans for years, and there was many times where he was my worst nightmare, but you also realize that he's, one of my closest brothers in life at this point. Yeah. So it's one of those things that you never know where football's going to take you, and you're grateful for it. And being a part of Georgia football is another layer of something that's truly special.
Let me change the subject here for a moment. You're out of the country, so you may not be aware of this, but Georgia got a nice flip over the weekend. Chauncey Bowens, a running back committed to Florida, has decided he's seen the light. He's a convert now. He's on his way to the University of Georgia, which I love. And the point that I made to our audience before you join us, John, is that, this kind of seems old hat now, where it seems like, Georgia's beating Florida in the football field each and every year. Georgia is winning major recruiting battles against Florida and many times flipping players away from Florida each and every year. But to me, no matter how commonplace it becomes, it is an important building block for the program. Around here, we always talk about good Georgia fans being Gator haters and the importance of beating up on Florida. And the fact that Georgia has done that so consistently, John, I don't believe that lessens the significance of it whatsoever. From your perspective, how valuable is it the fact that Georgia, who's seemingly going to be playing Florida every year moving forward, even with all the change afoot in the SEC, Georgia's going to continue to be playing Florida each and every year? How important is it that Georgia's established this level of dominance over these lousy, stinking Gators?
It's huge, and it talks to the competitive nature of our staff and really the culture that's been cultivated in the University of Georgia. It's not just on Saturdays. It has to be in recruiting. And I thought the message last year as we went into the season is we're not the hunters, we're the hunters. And that continues to be reflected throughout the entire program. I don't think the word complacency is allowed within the walls of the Buttsmere, because in every aspect, whether it's practice or a position battle or among recruiting, there is such a hunger and a tenacity in the approach in which Coach Smart and his entire staff take as they go towards not only what happens during the season, but what leads up to it is the reason why there is such a great separation between the University of Georgia and 99% of the other colleges that are playing football at this level, because there is a huge separation. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that anytime you can poach some of the talent that Florida might be able to recruit in a short period of time, that is a huge victory for Georgia, because you have to be aware of any companies doing a SWOT analysis. One of the things you're looking at is what are the threats, and in the East, if you can maintain that separation and make sure that the talent that's going against to your competitor is inferior to what you got, you're positioning yourself for success. So big win for Georgia, yet another in a long list of recruiting victories that Coach Smart seems to string together year after year.
We'll let you go after this. Speaking of the Georgia-Florida rivalry, we had some news come out last week about the expanded, or I should say improved stadium there in Jacksonville. This thing is going to be completely reimagined, kind of bringing it to sort of a state-of-the-art facility the way that it kind of hasn't been in the past. What kind of impact do you think an improved stadium, better facility down there in Jacksonville, what do you think that could have impact on like the future of the Georgia-Florida rivalry? We've talked about this before about whether or not it stays in Jacksonville long term, kind of seeing the commitment the Jaguars seem to have in improving that stadium and the role they think that Georgia-Florida plays in kind of a permanent home in that new improved stadium. What do you think this means for the future of the cocktail party, the fact that the Jaguars seem very serious about making this a very improved stadium as certainly as opposed to what it has been over the course of the last few years?
Well, we're talking about recruiting. What a better way to do it than to improve facilities. And I think the University of Georgia, as well as the entire conference, has positioned themselves for some flexibility in scheduling and options, and for Jacksonville to recognize that they need to be competitive and provide something of a higher quality to draw Georgia and Florida back into that environment. I think they're recognizing that, I'm sure there's other factors in why they're making those improvements, but it certainly is a factor in something, a chip they can play, a card they can put on the table that says, we want this game to stay here, and that matters.
So as I get ready to say goodbye to you, I don't have this photo to show our audience. I'm sure at some point in time I will. But you shared this with me, you and your lovely wife riding a camel there on the beach. What is the, I don't know if we can quite get this zoomed in for people to see it, but what is that like? There we go. Look at that. Boy, nice technology here. Kind of see a little bit of a version of that. John, what's that like? Is that more nervous for you climbing on top of the camel, or for the camel to have a former NFL offensive tackle climbing on top of it? Who was more nervous, you or the camel in this particular situation?
I was certainly grateful that he was able to stand up with me on his back, but it's one of those things where you're not expecting to be riding a camel on the beach of Morocco and the northernmost part of the continent of Africa.
Sure.
So, unique way to start the day, to say the least.
No doubt about that, John. Life takes us some interesting places over the course of a long lifespan, for sure. So, John, we're going to let you get back and enjoying all of that. We appreciate you taking some time away from a wonderful trip to be a part of our show here today. So, thank you so much for that. Safe travels, and we look forward to talking to you again, I guess, from a more normal confine again very soon.
Yeah, it's always great to be a dog, and even when you're traveling internationally. So, from Morocco, go Dogs.
Go Dogs right back to you, John. Absolutely.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
One of our good friends on Twitter had sent me a message saying today was his birthday. This is a true story. And his birthday wish was that I would say go Dogs back to John when John said it, because that's John's sign off each and every week. He always says that. He always says go Dogs. It's just what he always does. And so he wanted me to say go Dogs back to John. So there you go. I will give the go Dogs back to John today as he joins us there. And certainly very impressive to kind of join us there from Morocco, riding on the camel. That is truly amazing, a really amazing thing. So happy to have John joining us there. Some very interesting words from him, and always good to get his perspective as it relates to the Georgia Bulldogs from Morocco. And like I said before, one of my favorite movies is Casablanca. So at some point in time, I wouldn't mind going and seeing that over there. I've not really done a ton of the international travel, but at some point in time, other than the Caribbean, of course, which I'm seemingly at every 3 weeks. But beyond that, have not done a ton of the international travel. One of these days, I hope I get a chance to do that for sure. By the way, speaking of the Caribbean, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And there are lots of rumors afoot about DawgNation Cruise 2024. May be able to tell you about some of this coming up very soon. I hope I can. I hope the rumors are true. You never really know, right? You hear rumors, you hear whispers, you're innuendo. You never quite know how true a lot of it is. But we are led to believe that some good things could be happening very, very soon. Can't wait to get the chance to tell you all about that. Here's what I can also tell you, though. Is before the summer's done, I'm actually really excited. We get a chance to take a little bit of a weekend cruise with our family. I'm going to be going, taking my wife and kids. My brother, his family going to be going. We're actually taking our mom on this cruise, and it's something that we kind of gave her for Christmas and wanted to surprise her with it at Christmas. Amazing time as we kind of, were able to kind of spring that surprise on her. And over the course of the last couple of months, just watching the excitement, the enthusiasm of everybody kind of realizing all the stuff we're going to get a chance to do. Last night we're kind of sitting around the house. We were watching some YouTube videos, just kind of, we're going to be on board Independence of the Seas and looking at some of that. And just a really fun, exciting thing. I just love that. I love the anticipation for cruise. You've heard me say that before. The excitement of, hey, we're going to go here in Nassau. We're going to go here for Perfect Day Coco Cay. We're going to enjoy this while we're on board. Here's the specialty restaurant I want to eat at, or the special thing I want to do on board the ship. There's all kinds of things that you might want to do. And if you haven't experienced this excitement for yourself, I truly believe that now's a great time to do that. Whether we head towards the end of 2023 or you look early 2024 with the debut of Icon of the Seas, whether you're going out of Port Canaveral, just sort of south of us near Orlando, or one of the other, Florida ports like Fort Lauderdale, Miami, or you're thinking about maybe going to Alaska or something like that. There's all kinds of great opportunities out there when it comes to a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And Royal Caribbean believes the great Royal Caribbean cruise made even better when you have a great travel agent helping you out with it. Somebody asked me the other day, does Jessica Slater really book your cruise travel? Absolutely. She is the travel agent we have trusted for our Royal Caribbean cruise vacation needs. And so you can do like we do. We give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. And she can take care of whatever you need for your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation today. All right, we're going to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean for a moment. Interesting words. We had some stuff from Paul Finebaum a little earlier. Interesting stuff as it relates to Paul Finebaum. He was on WJOX this morning. That's the sports radio station in Birmingham. He kind of said something that I think is going to get some attention a little bit. That according to Finebaum, now how he would know this when they haven't really been practicing, I don't know. But he says that Jalen Milroe is actually pulling ahead in the Alabama quarterback competition a little bit. In other words, Tyler Buchner, who transfers in from Notre Dame, is not transferring in necessarily to be the Alabama starter, according to what Paul Finebaum says, that he might come here and be a backup. Now, it's important to note that had Buchner stayed at Notre Dame, there is a very good chance he's going to be the third-string quarterback, even though he was starting at the end of the season, started in the bowl game against South Carolina. The truth is, Sam Hartman had transferred over from Wake Forest. He was doing so with the idea of being the starter. Tommy Reese, the new Alabama offensive coordinator who had been at Notre Dame, while he was at Notre Dame, he was pursuing Sam Hartman. So pretty clearly, it seems like Reese knew he needed an upgrade over Buchner at quarterback at Notre Dame had he stayed. So you would presume his feelings about Buchner don't necessarily change just because he came to Alabama. But looking at what's going on with Ty Simpson, what's going on with Jalen Milroe, it seems like Alabama knew that it needed some quarterback depth. That's why you bring Buchner in, to kind of bolster that and kind of, I guess, enhance your competition, maybe. You might sort of say it that way. But according to what Paul Finebaum says, and I guess you have to take this somewhat seriously because he's clearly getting this from somewhere, is that Buchner comes in, but it looks like it's Jalen Milroe who right now is sort of believed to be the favorite to win this job, which if you want to kind of do the sort of algebraic equation on this and solve for X, I guess that means that Ty Simpson, who at one point in time was a touted recruit. I mean, at one point in time, Simpson was kind of viewed to be a major recruiting win. And moving into the 2023 calendar year, the 2023 season, a lot of Alabama fans were hoping because what they saw from Milroe a year ago when Milroe played in place of an injured Bryce Young, most Alabama fans were not wowed by this. They were not overwhelmed by this. They were not blown away by what they saw from Jalen Milroe. But they thought, well, maybe we'll be blown away by what we'll see from Ty Simpson. And if Milroe's kind of only this above average, good, not great, maybe not even quite so good, then Simpson, because of how touted he was as a recruit, well, he's clearly destined to be better than this. But sometimes we know that recruits don't quite pan out to be exactly what they're supposed to be. Sometimes that happens. In the case of Ty Simpson, apparently he just is not it, or is the parlance of the moment, he is not him, apparently. And so it's either Milroe or it's going to be Buchner here. And for Alabama fans, they may have to get used to the idea that the quarterback that they were kind of underwhelmed by a year ago might be their starting quarterback here for this upcoming season, which actually kind of ties us back to something that Greg McElroy had talked about the other day, about the idea that Alabama may try to get back to its roots here a little bit more. Run the football, try to play some good defense. And now you're left to conclude, and I think this has been kind of the overarching viewpoint for a while, that some of that return to roots for Alabama might be based on the necessity of they just sort of know that's what it is right now. That's what they're going to have to do. I think that's pretty interesting to consider. One more thing I want to give you here for a moment. So I've told you before, I have really been enjoying college baseball. I just think that this NCAA baseball tournament is probably the most underrated sporting event that exists anywhere. The regionals, and going back to last weekend, were a ton of fun. The super regionals have been incredibly fun. We have 2 super regional games left. One of these involves an SEC team. A lot of y'all know, or at least some of you know, that I don't like Tennessee baseball very much. I would say that rooting against Tennessee baseball is a very fun thing to do. So we have a deciding game 3 in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, between Southern Miss and Tennessee today. So Game 1 of this series was on Saturday. Weather was awful. You had to come back and conclude Game 1 yesterday morning. Southern Miss held on for the win there. Tennessee took care of them yesterday afternoon, so now you have deciding Game 3 here today. Vols in baseball are always, causing some sort of, manufactured melodrama out of something. They're massively complaining about the fact that they had to go, play on the road at Southern Miss. That Southern Miss was tabbed to host the Super Regional. Tennessee baseball thinks it's beneath them to go on the road here. Even some of their media types were kind of complaining about that a little bit. So that's just another reason to dislike Tennessee baseball, I think. But we'll see if Southern Miss can serve at home and work its way into the College World Series here, or if Tennessee becomes another SEC entrant into the event. Last night we were watching LSU hold off South Carolina and go into the College World Series, and the box stadium there in Baton Rouge is just rocking. It's one of the great venues for college baseball. My son, he asked me, he said, Daddy, if Georgia was going to go to the College World Series, would their fans be going crazy like this too? And I said, yes, son, I believe they would. And I had to remind him that, hey, Georgia actually has been to Super Regionals before, and Georgia's won Super Regionals in the past. And, this has been a fan base that's been energized by baseball before. And that if you saw that happen again, maybe we will see that happen with the brand new coach, Wes Johnson has been hired, that maybe we will see this team kind of get back to that. But I believe, even though the LSU baseball fans are obviously probably the most passionate in the SEC, that I do believe that if Georgia could have some of that same level of success, that you would see a big response from Georgia fans to that. So hopefully we get a chance to enjoy that here in the very near future. We'll always say, hey, maybe 2020 would have been the year, if not for the horrible circumstance of having that season stolen from those players, that maybe we would have seen Georgia enjoying some of the success then, because it had the 2 big Major League Baseball level pitchers, or at least pro draft level pitchers. It had 2 big arms. It had the team maybe then to make the kind of run we've been seeing SEC teams making with regularity, but just unfortunate circumstances prevented that from happening. But I do believe the fun that SEC teams are having this time of year, going to Omaha and all the great stuff along with that Georgia could be there with the right set of circumstances in place, and maybe a brand new coach will give them a chance to do that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We have, thank you. Hold off on the music. I guess we have not mentioned yet. We're actually getting down to the crunch time on this, and I apologize. I should have mentioned this well before now. I think the excitement of Jon Stinchomb and the High School Football Hall of Fame kind of took this away from me. But don't forget that your time right now to get involved and get in on a great giveaway is right now. Should have mentioned this earlier before now. Need to make sure we do this before we close out today's show. That we're actually running down our final days, because today's the 12th as I'm broadcasting here at the moment. You have between now and June 17th to get in on our Celebrate American Heroes giveaway, courtesy of Traeger Grills and Kroger. You've heard me talk about this before. Someone's going to win a Traeger Ironwood XL grill plus a Kroger $500 gift card. This is going to be an amazing giveaway. And here's how you could be the winner. All you got to do is tell a great story. By going to DawgNation.com, you can upload a photo or a short video. Someone in your life, or someone that you know about that's been an American hero, someone who served our country or maybe serves your community, someone who just goes above and beyond to make our country a better place, your world a better place, someone who's personally impacted you or impacted the people around you. These average, everyday American heroes who have just made life great or made life better whatever that story is for you, by telling that story, you could be a winner courtesy of Traeger Grills and Kroger. A Traeger Ironwood XL grill that's valued at $2,000. A Kroger $500 gift card. Simply go to DawgNation.com, upload the photo of this person or a short video telling about this person, telling that story about how that person has impacted you or the person or people that you know. And by telling that story, that could make you a winner courtesy of Kroger. And you personally could walk away with the Traeger Ironwood XL grill, the Kroger $500 gift card. DawgNation.com's got all the details that you need about this and your opportunity to submit your story that would make you a winner courtesy of Kroger and Traeger grills. So go to DawgNation.com for a lot more on that. You got between now and June 17th to do so. It is crunch time getting involved on this, so make sure you do that today. Go to DawgNation.com for a lot more on all of that. Now we'll wrap up the show. Yeah, do not want to get that away. Do not want to get out of here without doing a lot of that. So very, very important stuff on all of that. And we'll obviously shift gears now to our golden shoes. We talked on the show today about how important it is to make fun of those lousy, stinking Gators, and our golden shoe gives us a chance to do that. Chris Causey sent this in. Speaking of movies that I loved, I mentioned Casablanca a little earlier. A more contemporary movie that I also love there as well as The Usual Suspects. And the character played by Benicio del Toro, one of the lines from the movie, he'll flip you for real. Well, guess what? That's what Kirby Smart will do there as well, especially when it comes to players who happen to be committed to those lousy, stinking Gators. Kirby Smart will flip you for real. Chris Causey sent that. Very well done. Chris will give you a golden shoe for that. And our buddy the Mad Dog there as well, speaking of flips, and Flipper the Dolphin. Kirby Smart, a shirtless Kirby, riding on the back of Flipper, jumping over Billy Napier. That takes some real imagination to conjure all that up. Mad Dog sent that to us. Hashtag golden shoe, he says. Hashtag go dogs too. Mike the Mad Dog, well-earned golden shoe indeed. That is quite a work of art there of Kirby and Billy Napier. And yeah, Napier's got more reason to be upset, and that is very funny to be able to see. And lousy, stinking Gators took an L to Georgia over the weekend. 138 days from right now, they will take another L at the hands of the Dogs, we believe. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. As we said before, we do it each and every day, and we'll do it again tomorrow with you back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, quite a show today. Jon Stinchomb from Morocco, Georgia flipping recruits from Florida. Really fun and good stuff here. Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame aftermath continues here. So a lot of really good and fun stuff with all of that. That is great to be able to see. Randy Hall also shouting out Nate Frazier, another one of these Georgia recruits that could be in the fold here sooner rather than later. So there's a lot of energy and excitement around this Georgia recruiting class, and we love all of that. We're going to take some of your comments now as a part of our first our R.S. Andrews cool down. Of course, R.S. Andrews is one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust all of them for all of that, including getting your air conditioning unit tuned up and ready to go to keep you cool, getting that water heater replaced. That needs to be the case. Listen, if you want to take a cold shower, if you're one of those guys that, you know, what's the thing, like the cold plunge type stuff, some people like the cold showers to get tough. But if that's your choice, you can do that. But listen, if you want the choice to have that hot shower, which most of us do, R.S. Andrews get that water heater replaced for you so you can do all of that. All right, so let's dive in and get some comments. Eugene Wallace says, flipping, you better believe. That's a lot of fun. Alan Hampton says, hope we don't have to give up either one, but if I had to, which would you prefer to be? The lousy, stinging Gators or the South's oldest rivalry? Yeah, Georgia's got to play Florida each and every year. It just does. And if you say, well, why is it Florida over Georgia? Because it's not going to be a division thing anymore. At one point in time, there was a little bit of extra juice to Georgia-Florida because they were in the same division. Here's the thing. Georgia's permanent rival needs to be a team that views Georgia as its most hated foe. And Auburn, for as much as a lot of their fans hate Georgia, and probably now, if you ask the average Auburn fan, who would you like to beat the most right now? I would bet the majority of Auburn fans may actually say Georgia right now, because the truth is they've beaten Alabama far more frequently than they've beaten Georgia as of late, as weird as that might be to imagine. It is true that Auburn's ineptitude against Georgia is far worse than it has been against Alabama. Gus beat him in 2019. in 2013, and in 2010. So Malzahn actually had 3 wins against Alabama, but gosh, Auburn hasn't beaten Georgia in any form or fashion since 2017. Also, he did beat him in 2017 too. 4 wins in the last 13 years for Auburn against Alabama. Far less success than that against Georgia. So a lot of Auburn fans would like to beat Georgia probably more than anything else right now. But no Auburn fan, for the most part, I don't think, would say that Georgia is a bigger rival for them than Alabama is. So you can't have Georgia's permanent opponent if you only had one permanent opponent. You can't have it being a team that sort of views someone else as its biggest rival. You just can't do that. You are deserving of a rival that views you as its biggest. And Florida fans, no doubt, view Georgia as its biggest SEC rival. There's no question about that. That's why you have to do it that way. Let's see what else. Crow King 123 says we've historically owned Auburn. Both Rick and Kirby mostly own them. Yeah, a lot of success against Auburn, which is a really good thing. Paul Moon says, I'm kind of hoping Tennessee makes it to Omaha so my Deeks can beat them too. Yeah, listen, Wake Forest is very good. They absolutely obliterated Alabama. So fun to think about. It's also kind of fun to think, like Wake Forest, I think is are they the smallest school in the Power 5? 3,000 or so undergrad students. Obviously not a lot of great success in football, typically speaking. They've made the ACC championship a couple of times, but not great success necessarily. But in a sport like baseball, there's just more room for that. Vanderbilt's not a very big school either, and they're obviously one of the best programs year over year. So kind of fun to think of Wake Forest and a small fan base, small school, could make the College World Series. They're probably, got, Oral Roberts going to be there as well. So you got some fun stuff going on there with all of that. All right, let's see what else. Crow King 123 says there are Florida fans that focus on Florida State as their biggest. That's probably the case. But when it comes to an SEC rival, there's no doubt that Florida views Georgia as its biggest. I'd be curious to hear what percentage of Florida fans kind of view, Georgia as compared to Florida State as the biggest rival. I'm sure that a lot of that sort of depends on how those two particular series are going in any particular moment. There's obviously a state law down in Florida that Florida has to play Florida State, so there's a certain level of importance put on the game because of how the legislature's treated it over the years. Nature Gator says Florida State's Florida's biggest rival. UGA is Florida's biggest SEC rival. I'm sure that's the case. Or at least I'm sure there are plenty of Florida fans who think that. Much the same way that Georgia's got, a good number of rivals there as well. But there's no way. I mean, the average Florida fan, if you said, hey, you could beat somebody this year, would you want to beat Georgia or would you want to beat Florida State? I'm guessing most Florida fans, hopefully, are sensible enough to say it'd be better to beat Georgia. I'm guessing, hopefully. Johnny Surf Dog says, I remember playing UGA on the EA Sports video game in Dynasty mode where you get all the top recruits, go undefeated and win back-to-back titles in blowout fashion. Kirby's not done that in real life. Johnny, that's pretty funny. That's about right, for sure. For sure. Oh, yeah, Fred Gunn pointed this out. I knew I was going to get some grief for this. So my phone screen is a mess right now. It's all cracked up. So back when we went to like L.A. for the national championship, I'd bought a new microphone to put on my phone to take some videos with, but it wouldn't fit. And I got one of those phone. Like I used to not like to carry the phone cases because like the little, those little like phone screen protector type things, because it just takes up more space in my pocket. It's kind of uncomfortable. And but I finally got one because I'd broken enough phones that just seemed like a good financial choice. But in order to get the microphone to fit on the phone, had to take the screen, like the screen thing off of it. And so ever since then, I haven't had it back on there because I tore it up pulling it off. And it's kind of embarrassing because like the back of my phone is like teal or whatever. That's the only reason that's the case is just because that was the only phone they had when I bought this. But when you have the phone the phone cover up on it. Nobody can see the sort of weird color on the back. But the point is I had to take the phone protector off so I could put the microphone on. And since then, I've dropped this thing like 15 times. I really have. Dropped it so many times. And it's all scratched up and bent up. And, you know, I'm one of those guys. I'm gonna ride the phone as long as it'll go, right? It's like I'm not replacing this thing until I absolutely have to. But it is scratched up. And when I showed it on the screen earlier, I was like, I'm going to get grief for this. Or I was just noticing how scratched up it looked when I was kind of showing it. So that is indeed the case. Let's see what else. UGA Boy for Life Brunetti says, if we had to drop a game, give me the oldest rivalry in the stinking cocktail party and drop the Tennessee game, please. Yeah, that's the one that is going to go by the wayside. Georgia is not going to be playing Tennessee every year moving forward, almost certainly, for sure. And, you know, it's kind of weird. It's like I'm old enough to remember back in a time in which Georgia didn't play Tennessee every year anyway. You know, in the 80s when I was a kid, Georgia did not play Tennessee every year. Played them in 80 and 81. That's a little bit too long ago for me to have been old enough to remember it. But from like, you know, when I started kind of really getting into Georgia football kind of mid-80s, you know, Georgia didn't play Tennessee. They didn't play Tennessee. They went from like 81 to 88 without playing Tennessee at all. That was not one of those teams that Georgia played every year. Georgia-Tennessee games oftentimes would be big games. You remember Herschel Walker. You remember things like that. But they did not play Georgia and Tennessee every year. When they became East Division opponents, they did start playing every year. Maybe they should have been playing every year before that anyway. But for all the people want to say about, you know, you go to an 8-game schedule or a 9-game schedule or something like that, the truth is, when I was a kid, the SEC schedule was 6 games. You only played 6 conference games. You played a lot more non-conference, you know, kind of what we think of now as Power 5 type teams. Georgia played a lot of ACC teams in a lot of years. Back then, you only played 6 SEC games every year, which is kind of strange. Jonathan Aaron says, how is Bama going to be back to a good defense with Kevin Steele as defensive coordinator? Well, in fairness, I don't think that Steele is very splashy hire, but I also don't think Kevin Steele is a bad defensive coordinator. And the truth is, and I hate to admit this because it's obviously, you know, I wish he was at Georgia, but the honest truth is that there's a very good chance that Caleb Downs is a very impactful freshman for Alabama. That just is the case. The Downs, I believe, is probably a special player. And, you know, I don't like the idea of a guy like that leaving our state, going to Alabama, and having good success, but I'm also not going to, like, pretend that it's not potentially true, that the early buzz on Downs in Tuscaloosa is pretty well exactly what you would expect it to be. So if you're talking about Alabama kind of getting back to playing better defense, that's just one of the ways and reasons why they might, is because they just get a more impactful performance from a guy like Downs. Let's see what else. Jeff Ingram said only played 10 games total back then, too. When I was a kid, they did play 11. They started playing 12 more regularly, I guess, early 2000s. But when I was a kid, they did play 11 games. High school teams played 10, but college played 11. Let's see what else. Drew S. Miller says, I'd like for UGA to play Oklahoma every year. That would be fun to whoop up on them consistently. Might be a bold request. Yeah, Georgia, as it's likely to be, will be playing Oklahoma every other year. And you'll go to Norman once every 4 years. If there's 3 permanent opponents, Oklahoma's 3 permanent opponents, one of those obviously going to be Texas. And believe it or not, there's a lot of energy around Oklahoma and Missouri playing every year. I think Missouri wants that. You know, if you're Missouri, if you're one of those teams like way out in the middle of nowhere, like Missouri or Arkansas, you need some identity, right? You know, you've never had a lot of SEC identity because you are so far away from the league's kind of cultural epicenter. And so Missouri actually has a lot of history with Oklahoma, going back to the time in which both those programs were in the old Big 8. Big 8 became the Big 12, kind of a union between the Southwest Conference and the old Big 8 became the Big 12. But back when there was a Big 8, Missouri and Oklahoma played every single year. Now, Missouri wasn't nearly as good as Oklahoma was, but they had a lot of history. And so I think Missouri wants to get back to that. I think Oklahoma's probably fine with that because it's probably an easy win more often than not. So Missouri, Oklahoma would be an every year type thing if there are 3 permanent opponents. You know, obviously Oklahoma and Texas would be an every year type thing. And I guess the other one would be who knows what. So probably not room for Oklahoma to be a permanent dance partner with Georgia each and every year. But you will get to see Georgia-Oklahoma pretty frequently, though. Drew Miller says he's not the recruited kicker. It's just a common name. So there you go, Drew. That's pretty funny. The recent Georgia commit also named Drew Miller. Wayne Kirkland says Bama does still have the horses if they can develop it. Yeah, we'll find out how much they are able to do that. Sandy Price says when it comes to blue chip players, you can never put a star on someone's heart. Just ask Stet. He also says hashtag go for 3 and 23, which we love. And I think that's true. But I don't think it's also true there as well, which is, we've kind of talked before about what my belief of the Kirby doctrine is in terms of, Kirby's philosophy that sort of guides him as a coach, that it's you've got to take talented players and you've got to train them up so that they're tough. And you can't have one without the other. In other words, if you say, well, the quality of a player's heart's what matters to me, and I want guys who are willing to kind of do what Georgia asks of them, and I'll take those players any day of the week. But if you do that at the expense of valuing true measurable talent over the course of the long haul, you'll be far lesser of a program than you otherwise would be. Conversely, if all you said is, hey, let me be like Texas A&M in 2022. Let me just bring in a bunch of talented players, and we'll figure it out once they get here, and the only thing that matters is the NFL potential they have because of how their bodies are built or how fast they run or how high they jump or whatever else, how big they are. Well, if you do that without any kind of consideration to your idea of what's in your heart, what you're made of, how tough you're willing to be, well, you'll also be lesser of a team there as well. That you obviously have counterexamples like Stetson Bennett and things like that, but ultimately the Georgia way seemingly is, hey, you do have to value the talent. While Georgia does have a good number of former 3-star type players, or in Stetson's case, walk-on type players who've gone on to great things at UGA, the truth is that still more than 3 out of every 4 players on this roster recruited over the course of the last 4 years are former 4- and 5-star recruits. So Georgia's looking for that perfect Venn diagram of talented players who are willing to put in the work. And, the old line about, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard, maybe that's the case. But when you've got a team full of talent that also is willing to work hard, what you get are laughers. You get 40-point blowouts, which is what Georgia plays more often than not because of the way in which they've kind of zeroed in on that. And, yeah, there may be, occasionally a guy around here who's sort of a lot more about talent than he is the sort of intangible stuff. And you probably need, a couple of those guys every now and then because you want that talent. And there may be a couple of examples of, hey, well, measurably, the recruiting rankings never were all that kind to him. The NFL scouts don't seem to have a whole lot of interest in him, but my gosh, he sure is giving his all for Georgia, and Georgia's better because of it. You've got kind of outliers on both sides of this, but the main nucleus of what makes up the Georgia roster, I believe, are talented players who are willing to outwork their competition, and that is a very special combination. Interesting comment. Sandy Price also bringing up something that somebody else brought up the other day, that in the future, in a non-division world, Tennessee being good like they are right now, could potentially one day be an opponent for Georgia in the SEC championship, the same way that Florida could be an opponent for Georgia in the SEC championship. That you could have, these sort of traditional rivals playing in the SEC championship, the same way in 2017 Georgia played Auburn. That had never happened before. Those two teams playing each other, both teams have been in the SEC championship, just not against each other. That is one of the interesting byproducts of the new SEC scheduling model is the idea of a lot more traditional rivals playing in that game, which I think could be very interesting. Matt Rukavina says if it was just talent, Texas A&M would be good. He says it's about work ethic, values, and determination. And once again, to kind of sort of nitpick a little bit, so Matt says, it's not about just talent, it's about work ethic, values, and determination. But it also isn't about work ethic, values, and determination because there are plenty of high school players that have great work ethic, they have tremendous values, and they have undeniable determination. But if they don't have the God-given like genetic traits or the, God just made some people different. He made them bigger, he made them faster, he made them whatever else. That you got to try to find the true talents that have the work ethic, that have the values, that have the determination. That the intangible stuff alone is not enough to make a football player. there is a certain thing where, measurable talent, measurable God-given traits are always going to have a lot of value. The traits alone are not enough to make a player, but the intangible stuff without those traits, that isn't going to be enough to make a player either. Let's go back around the comment sections here for a minute. Let's see what else. Oh, Green Soldier's here today. Wow. I hadn't seen Green Soldier here in a little while. He's been very busy. But good to see him here for sure. Nature Gator also says that if Bama gets excellent quarterback play, the Tide can play with anyone this coming season, but Texas already has an excellent quarterback. That's a huge game. Yeah, and the pick that we've made is I do believe that Texas beats Alabama there in week 2 because I do think that Quinn Ewers is a really good quarterback. I mean, my understanding is that, obviously Arch Manning's a big quarterback prospect, but the other quarterback on the Texas roster was thought to have had a pretty good spring too and thought to be a pretty good prospect. Is it – what's that guy's name? I always forget his name. But anyway – The truth is that even though you have actually 2, because there's a chance that Art's actually the 3rd quarterback at Texas this year, but even though you've got 2 pretty good quarterbacks there at Texas, the other quarterback, Quinn Ewers, just distanced himself, just absolutely ran away with that quarterback competition. That I believe that Quinn Ewers is probably a very good quarterback. I do believe that's probably true. This is one of those guys that has been hyped up for a long time, and he's sort of transferred around and kind of played the game a little bit. There's been a little bit of drama around him at times, but the truth is when it's all said and done, he's going to probably turn out to be, it seems like, a pretty good player, a very good player potentially. And there's a lot of stuff I am more than happy to tell you I feel like we don't know, like about the upcoming season. There are a lot of things that you can make educated guesses about, but you don't know for sure. The one thing I have some confidence in is that Alabama does not have a threshold of great quarterback play obtainable for it here for this year. I just don't believe that it does. That if Jalen Milroe had great traits, we would have seen more of that from him this past season. So can he be good enough? Can he be serviceable enough? I think he probably could be, just given the overall talent Alabama has around it. I mean, you got to be careful completely writing off the Crimson Tide. I think you do. I think some Georgia fans have completely written off Alabama. I think they've done that too quickly. I really do. But this idea that, hey, if Alabama gets great quarterback play, watch out. If they need great quarterback play, then they're probably not a true national championship contender because I don't believe they've got a great quarterback. If they were, we would already know. If that was the case, we would already know, but we don't quite have that sense here right now. So this is going to be about, do you have a quarterback who's just good enough? Do you have enough around him to make this team what it has a chance to be? It's when we said, J.C. Latham is probably the most important player in the Alabama roster right now because, he's probably a very high first-round pick next year's NFL draft. Sometimes we see these great tackles make the other 4 offensive linemen very good too because I do believe that offensive line is one of those positions where there's a certain chemistry there that I think it's better to sort of measure offensive lines collectively than it is to measure the players individually, and that Latham could raise the fortunes for the other 4 offensive linemen. Alabama needs a great offensive line season here this year in order to be the kind of team that can truly compete for a championship. Let's see what else. Croking 123 also kind of pointing out, he says that the Bama's best friend this year might be its schedule. They have struggled on the road, and this year their biggest games seem to all be at home, so that could be true. Could be true. Let me go back to DawgNation.com for a minute. Randy Hall mentioned that Caleb Downs could maybe be the next Eric Berry. Yeah, I think that Downs could be a very good player for sure. Thor Rule says dogs are excellent at looking at the need before all. They scout better than any team and are 100% on finding the occasional diamonds in the rough. Yeah, we talked about this. It's the one thing about the Georgia kind of formula that I don't believe necessarily gets enough credit because, as we've pointed out, there are clear examples here where Georgia's scouting has won them a player that they otherwise might not get. The Jordan Davis is probably the best, easiest to understand example of this. Davis was viewed by many people to be an offensive lineman. Davis, I think, was sort of thought to have too much bad weight to be an athletic defensive lineman. And listen, I don't hold that against a high school player necessarily either, because, a huge part, if you've ever tried to lose weight, there's only so much weight training and, cardio, things like that you can do to overcome what it is that you're eating. The nutrition you choose to put in your body is going to have a gigantic impact on your overall physical condition. This is even true for high school players there as well. A lot of high school football players just eat a bunch of junk food. They just do. Junk food's a little cheaper. It's a little bit easier to find. You're for the most part kind of burning it off because you're very active. But most high school players just eat a bunch of junk. I think it's probably less true now than it used to be, but it's still just pretty true, is that a lot of high school players eat a bunch of junk. That's one of the reasons why when you see a guy go to Georgia within a couple of months, a lot of times these guys look dramatically different because they're just eating better. And Georgia got that nutrition science where they kind of program those meals so perfectly for you, high protein or whatever else. And these bodies just look so different very, very quickly because of the kind of nutrition they're being fed. But the point is, a lot of guys saw, Jordan Davis as a high school player eating the way a typical high school player might. Some bad weight, clearly big enough to play major college football, but maybe hard to imagine. It's one of those things like when people are like looking at a home that needs some renovations, typically speaking, people don't have much of an imagination. They can't imagine what the house could look like if you did this and you did that. A lot of times maybe looking at a football player, a lot of coaches, scouts don't have the same kind of imagination either of, okay, well, this is what this guy looks like at this weight. But what if he lost 30 pounds? What would that look like then? And it seems like Georgia's just got a little bit better imagination about some of that kind of stuff. Joe Garliardi on the subject of Edric Houston. Yeah, it just sort of seems like, every year it seems like there are one or two guys that are just destined to get away. Houston, I believe, is that guy. We said, was it a Friday show, I guess, that, hey, Georgia had the chance to kind of change the narrative maybe, but there wasn't any real sense they were going to. And, I don't get the impression that has happened. I guess there's been some of those online predictions for Houston going to Ohio State. Seems like that's probably what that's going to be. And I don't begrudge him for that necessarily. That's what he wants to do. That's what he wants to do. I do think he's a good player. I think it's interesting that even though Trayvon Walker became a number 1 overall pick, the idea of the big defensive end type player who's a little bit too big to be an outside linebacker, the idea that he would still rather go to that 4-3 system, play there, kind of be a little bit more of a glamour type guy than would it be at Georgia, even though Trayvon Walker doing the exact same thing became the number 1 overall pick. That's really interesting to me. It really is. And that's pretty obviously what Miles Murphy wanted to do. That's why Murphy chose Clemson over Georgia, because they play kind of more of that traditional sort of 4-3 look. I don't know that decision worked out for him quite as well as it could have. Maybe he was still happy going to Clemson. But the idea of I'm going to go there and become an unquestioned superstar, he was a good player, but I don't think, he necessarily went there and became just an unquestioned superstar necessarily. He certainly wasn't the number 1 overall pick the way that Trayvon Walker became at Georgia. So I guess I was just sort of the belief that once, people saw what Trayvon didn't put up huge statistical numbers at Georgia, was a very important player and obviously a great player, but without putting up big stats, became the number 1 overall pick. I thought that might have a massive impact on recruits. And, clearly there are a lot of guys who want to come to Georgia because of that. But, that still hasn't changed the fact that for some players, defensive end types, being in the glamorous 4-3 defensive end role is just a little bit better than maybe what they might get at Georgia. Let's see what else. Yeah, Jacob Yarbrough also kind of mentioned the same thing. And I do get it, right? I do get that. I do. But, it's not like you can't get what you want to in terms of generational wealth by doing what a guy like Trayvon Walker did at Georgia. PDT says, of course, it's Go Dogs any day, every day. Braves sweeping the Mets off come-from-behind victory 7 in a row until last night. Straight 8-28. Yeah, the Braves are a lot of fun right now. They are a lot of fun right now. Bill Russell says the Jags are going to make 44 an outside linebacker. That'd be interesting to see. Jacksonville should be a pretty interesting team here this year. Randy Glass says, who's the favorite for the next 5-star to commit? I don't know. If you're putting it 5-star, would it be KJ Bolden? I mean, it seems like Georgia's still in the battle for Bolden here, but that's a guy. It seems like the visit went pretty well for him right now. Is that the next most likely 5-star for right now? Interesting question. Let me go back over to Facebook for a moment. We're going to get ready to wrap up here in a minute. Joseph Kennedy says the Mets stink, an underachieving franchise. Yeah. I saw where Cohen, the owner, kind of spoke up about them, tried to calm some of the fears there. It couldn't happen to a better bunch as far as I'm concerned. Bill Sanders says, going back to what we said a moment ago, it's one of the things that several coaches around middle Georgia are trying to get across to kids in the summer workouts. Nutrition and hydration are key. Yeah, I think it really is. And, I would say that for like the average guy, right? It's like if you're a high school football player, the truth is like most people are not, most people don't have those like super elite traits. And so if you want to narrow the gap between you and the guy who just got a little more sort of doled out at birth than maybe you got, for yourself, he's taller, he's bigger, he's whatever else, that nutrition can be the great equalizer there. Now, I sound like a huge hypocrite when I say that because obviously I haven't always taken nutrition as serious as I possibly could have been. But, I mean, most people are average athletes, right? It's like that's why it's average because it's just what the largest group of people are going to be. So if you're a young person, you sort of find yourself in that sort of average athlete category. You're not as big as the biggest. You're not as fast as the fastest. If you want to create a better opportunity for yourself, then really getting serious about your nutrition is the best way to do it. But the problem is good food's expensive. It just is. And so figuring out a way to get the kind of food that you need at an affordable price, that's a little bit tricky. I'm not saying it's a impossible burden to overcome. I'm not saying that, but for like that player who's just wished he was like 20 pounds bigger, I mean, it takes a lot of food, to give yourself the chance to add that muscle weight, which is obviously kind of expensive in its own right. But, food that perishes, like vegetables and meat and things like that, that's just way more expensive than the processed junk. It just kind of is. Let's see what else. Anything of note? Eric Ray says, make all guests sign off Go Dogs before they sign off. Yeah, Eric, I understand that. I love the fact that John has sort of chosen to make that his own personal kind of type of thing there. And I tried to find the tweet of it was Tupac's father is like what his like handle is. I tried to find the tweet of the guy who sent that to me earlier. Let me see if I can find that now. Who it was that sent that to me? Where did this go? It's like I have a hard time finding a lot of the stuff that people send sometimes because I have a lot of unrequested junk that sort of shows up in here from time to time. But where did this go? I'm not going to be able to find it now. But somebody had sent that to me, hey, for my birthday. So it's the official Ross on Twitter. He says, hey, B.A., my birthday is on Monday. Now, unless you see this after Monday's show, my birthday wish is for you to say Go Dogs back to Jon Stinchcomb. It'd be cool to hear. So I did that in honor of the official Ross on Twitter. He goes by Tupac's father. So I did that for him today. All right, let's see what else. Jesse Dellinger says, I love that Saban's complaining about their proposed permanent opponents. Yeah, kind of weird to think that, Saban went from being like the major proponent in favor of the expanded SEC schedule to the point where Alabama actually voted against it. Saban's never been afraid of being on both sides of whatever issue comes up. Let's see what else. We'll talk about Carson Beck in here. Johnny Surf Dog says Beck looked polished in most games, especially when he played the entire fourth quarter against the Vandy team that went on to beat Florida. So I'm having some fun there with that. Scott Green says he may have a letdown game, but hope it's against someone in the regular, not the SEC championship. Yeah, the good news for Beck is, if we assume conventional wisdom here, Beck's the starter, stays healthy all year long, that, early season, take South Carolina and Auburn, for instance, especially Auburn because it's on the road. Early season, you're talking about a guy who can rightly be said to be an inexperienced starter. But by the time you get to an LSU or maybe an Alabama in the SEC championship, if all goes according to plan, that should be Beck's 13th game. Well, guess what? At that point in time, that's not a first-year starter anymore. I mean, that's technically enough experience to be, moving on to a sort of like second season's worth of games. 13th, 14th, 15th game. He will have played at that point in time more than a full year because, technically speaking, you're only guaranteed 12 games in a year. That when you move into that postseason time of the year, you're talking about a guy at that point in time who's not quite so inexperienced anymore. Now, the one thing we'll all say is, but the feeling of playing one of these playoff games is just way, way different. That's true. The fact that Stetson seemed to be able to handle that pressure was always such a very important part of what made him a very successful quarterback at Georgia. And so we'll learn something different about Carson, assuming that Beck goes on to be the full-year starter. We'll learn something different about Carson in terms of how he handles that pressure. But just specifically the idea of playing without tons of experience, by the time you get to December and January, at that point in time, you are talking about a guy who's got a good bit of experience by that point in time. All right, final comments. Paul Moon says it feels like things are trending away with Ryan Wingo. There was no buzz after his official visit. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of this is like when you watch like the courtroom dramas, they always kind of wrap everything up within kind of a 2-hour framework for a movie or a 60-minute framework for a TV show. But in real life, actual courtroom drama plays out a lot longer and more slowly than that. I think the recruiting process kind of the same way here. I think that, maybe you know something that I don't. It's obviously possible that you do. But while there hasn't been a ton of buzz pro-Wingo since that visit, I haven't seen a ton of negative buzz either. It's just one of those things where I just think it's playing out slowly, I think. I think that's Georgia's best chance with that, kind of 5-star receiver type guy, but I don't get the impression that it's necessarily imminent or anything like that. Let's see what else. Thomas Tyson wondering if the Alabama offense might be focused around Justice Haynes this year. Could very well be. They've also got Richard Young coming in there as well, so they may be using a couple of those young running backs here this year. Andrew Hughes says that Carson Beck's like those Jimmy Dean breakfast cups. Warm them up a little bit, and they're ready to eat. Go Dogs. I like that, Andrew. That's good. Memphis Dog says he thinks that Ryan Wingo will be a slow decision. That's probably the case. Randy Hall says, did I see how fast the preferred walk-on Walter Blanchard is? I did not. I did not see that. But I would love to find out more about that. All right. We're going to go. Good stuff, as always. Thanks to all of you for being here. Sam Burke says, I really hope the offense is averaging in the upper 40s next season. That defense will be feasting in that type of situation. Yeah, it could be fun to see. This could be quite a team. Certainly has a great chance to be. So we'll look forward to all of that. Y'all check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. As I told you before, as this hot weather kind of gets here and stays here, if somebody's told you, you need a new air conditioning unit, that's maybe bad news. But the good news is our friends at R.S. Andrews may be able to tell you how you can get some new life out of an old unit. So find them online, rsandrews.com, for a lot more on that. Then get you tuned up, get some new life out of the old unit, and get you one more good summer out of a air conditioning unit that deep down you sort of know has reached its shelf life. You can get some more out of it. So find them online at rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. You'll have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We will look forward to talking to you then.